What is going on, YouTube? It is your boy, Faithful to God. And tonight we're going to be having a roundtable to discuss James White's latest video, in which he had certain things to say about myself and various of the panelists. But without further ado, I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves. I'm going to just kick right in. I'm going to let my sister Nefertiti introduce herself, and then everyone else can introduce themselves. So go right ahead. Let everyone know who you are. All right, my sis, let's start it off.
Hey guys, my name is Nefertiti. I go by Neffy. I, like all the other panelists, am an urban apologist, dealing with questions pertaining to being African American Christian in today's society.
All right, go ahead, my brother, Matthew Jackson.
All right, yes, I'm Matthew Jackson, Matt to my friends, MJ to everybody else. I'm an urban apologist dealing with the question of Christianity's rationality for African Americans and sometimes for others, if God leads me to that. But I'm here to help out and answer some pretty important questions tonight.
What's going on, party people? The place to be. I go by the name of the BK Apologist, transmitting all the way live. New York is the city, Brooklyn's the borough. What's good? What's popping?
What up, y'all? It's your hometown hero, the real Adam Coleman. Glad to be here with my man Faithful. As Matt Jackson said, answering some really important questions, man. So we're gonna get it in, y'all. See what happens.
All right. Appreciate that, y'all. So let the audience in on what's going on here. So 2 days ago, I made a Facebook wall post on my Mike Pereira Facebook account talking about something that I noticed from James White. It had to do with a particular article that he wrote dealing with Robert E. Lee, and I believe he was talking about his childhood. Now, he's going to talk about this in the video that we're going to play, because we're actually going to interact with his video in here. So I know my brother Adam Coleman is going to pull the video up in a little bit. And what we want to do is just give everybody a little bit of an insight into what's going on. Essentially, I made a post talking about what I perceive to be probably just a poor, how could I explain this? Just call it poor timing, that he would make a article or post, I don't know if it was a piece for a website, where he's essentially singing the praises of Robert E. Lee. And the reason why we found this to be insensitive on his end is because thinking about the climate that we're living in right now, right? With the George Floyd stuff, that's, all the other stuff that's been going on, the tension is in the air. It was simply not just the wrong time, but also the insensitivity of the article itself, knowing that he already has particular issues with African Americans, in that he's perceived to be insensitive as it comes to social issues, and this doesn't actually help his credibility or his reputation. And so I made the post to essentially call him into basically being more measured in how he, interacts with these kind of issues, and to not simply dismiss the people who have disagreements with him as being easily offended. Rather, that a person needs to consider everyone's experience in regards to topics like this, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this up on the screen right now. So this is the actual video. So this is James White's video. And what we're going to do is we're going to interact with his video and go over. But actually, before we do that, not to do any sort of disservice here, despite the fact that we have a disagreement with James White, I want it to be on record that we respect him as an apologist as it pertains to textual criticism, as it pertains to various issues such as King James onlyism He has an incredible book refuting that. Also, other areas, right? So, for example, the way that he interacts with, various other belief systems. We believe that he does a great job in those areas. But when it comes to this particular topic, the topic of social issues, we personally believe that he drops the ball, and we want to highlight why we believe he is dropping the ball in this particular area. Would everybody here on the panel agree that he is dropping the ball as it pertains to the area of social issues?
Without question. Absolutely.
Big time.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. And so we are not questioning him as being a Christian. So for the Hebrew Israelites who are going to watch this, this is not the one. We still don't endorse your belief system, and we certainly are not somehow going to start leaning in your direction. But all things considered, since this is an in-house issue and we believe that James White is a Christian, this is being done in the spirit of Proverbs 27:5, right? Open rebuke is better than secret love. And we believe that he needs to be corrected on this particular issue because it is creating an unnecessary divide in the body when we should be uniting on this issue. We should be bringing awareness to this problem because it is a growing problem in this country. It has been growing. It is not something brand new, and it is something that people need to be aware of. And if we're Christians and we truly are about the gospel, right, death, burial, and resurrection, then we should also be about what the gospel entails to the person who has been bought by the precious blood of Jesus Christ, which is to love our God above all things and love our neighbors as ourselves, right? Think of the Good Samaritan. Those things need to be considered, right? The parable of the Good Samaritan, the helping those who are in need, when they need help. And right now, there's a pressing need in the African American community and with brothers and sisters in Christ. They need to be addressed. They need to be talked about. We cannot simply brush these things under the rug. And so we want to highlight to not only James White, but those who may be on the fence about this topic, why it's important, right? No one in here is a Marxist. No one is a totalitarian. No one is advocating for any sort of secular liberalism. We are conservative in our biblical beliefs, and we believe that this is a topic that is ultimately backed up by the Bible, correct? Everyone in here would agree with that.
Yes.
All right.
Without question.
All right. So without further ado, I'm going to let my brother Adam Coleman play the portion of the video. And actually, before you do, let me just say this to James White: when you watch this in the future, Lord willing, you would consider this video and that you would be more charitable in the way that you approach this topic, that you would not simply dismiss it and treat it as if this can just be easily brushed to the side, that you would actually interact with the salient points that are going to be raised today, and that we could actually have a good dialogue so you can better understand where we're coming from and that you wouldn't simply dismiss us, because we don't deserve to be dismissed as fellow image bearers, as brothers and sisters in Christ. All right. So without further ado, my brother Adam Coleman, if you could go ahead and start playing the video now.
Gotcha. Oh yeah, just by the way, just let me know anytime you want me to stop. I'll just let it roll. When you say stop, I'll go ahead and pause.
Right.
All right.
And I promised over the weekend that I would address certain issues, and unfortunately, we don't have water at the office right now, so we're not going to go quite as long as we normally do. In fact, I just realized I didn't get any anyways. So, oh well, we're not going to go as long as we normally do. We'll try to sneak everything into an hour today, and then hope that the water is fixed by tomorrow, and see what we can do at that particular point in time. I wrote an article. It was only about. It was 2.5 parlay posts. That's about 2,500 words, I guess, or 2,500 characters, actually, not words. And I'm going to read it because I was then sent a rebuke by a fellow by the name of Mike Pereira. It says Mike Pereira is with Cab Malone and 71 others. So I assume there were 72, 73 people somehow. I'm not sure how you do that. And it was about this article. So not everybody read it. I think it's important to hear what I said because I'm being rebuked for it. So this is something that Christians believe is rebuke worthy. And I think we need to understand why, and we need to be able to respond to it because this is becoming a new dividing line. And it is a dividing line that allows you to identify, unfortunately, the influence of external sources of authority and external ways of thinking that are not derived from Scripture, that are derived from secular sources. So here's what I said. When I was a kid, my mom would take me to Gettysburg. We would walk the battlefield and visit all the monuments. I loved, we'd buy a genuine bullet from the battle, by the way. I still have one of those. Or fake Confederate money. It felt so crinkly and looked so cool because they tried to make it look older, so it got all crinkly and stuff. Anyway, I was born in Minneapolis, and I lived there in Pennsylvania, so the boys in blue were the good guys. But when we saw the statues of Lee or Longstreet, it never crossed my mind that they should be torn down. They were monuments to the men who fought here. Years later, I visited and walked Pickett's Charge. If you know what Pickett's Charge is, shame on you. I could not imagine the bravery of the men who made it all the way to the Union lines. Just amazing. And then I noted, you can go to Fredericksburg if you want to do the reverse journey. That is, if you want to be on the Union lines and try to get to the Confederate. In that case, it was the wall there in Fredericksburg, which had happened before Gettysburg, which is why the Union soldiers in Gettysburg chanted Fredericksburg, Fredericksburg when Pickett's Charge failed. They had been there. I am thankful for those trips, for I now live in a culture of offended feelings, not historical memories. Instead of honestly evaluating the past, seeing the good, the bad, even the ugly, people now live in an emotional haze of constant anger and frustration. Offense is now the greatest civic virtue, and you don't even have to be offended by the living alone. No, it is great to be offended by the dead. General Robert E. Lee was, in the opinion of almost any historian of the period, one of the greatest military leaders this nation ever produced. But you don't have to believe modern scholars. Just read what was said about him by his contemporaries, including those against whom he fought. He was not just respected, he was revered, or in the case of those on the other side, feared. Respect, admiration, honor, all accompanied his death only 5 short years after Appomattox. Governor Ralph Northam has announced that Lee's monument in Richmond will be removed. Already defaced, the monument shows Lee upon his trusty steed Traveler, who died shortly after Lee in 1870. I guess it is fitting. People who live by emotion rather than careful thought must be protected by the powers from even seeing anything that would offend. For a wise people, a grounded people, unified in a consistent worldview, history is a rich source of wisdom. You can look at Lee, recognize he was a man of his era, disagree mightily with his decisions and actions, all the while recognizing the utter childish foolishness of dragging him into your time and missing the great things that we learned from him and from others. Lee, Jackson, Grant, Sherman. Then I put the parenthetical comment, see how I'm more of an Easterner in my youth. And if you know the war, you know that they all fought in the Eastern theater, not the Western theater. Were all men of their days, well, Sherman did some, but primarily in the East, were all men of their days upon whom we could easily pour opprobrium in our modern superiority. And that seems to be the fashion of the day. But the fact is, no nation can survive self-hatred, and that is what this is. It is shallow, childish self-hatred that shows not the slightest adult capacity to categorize, consider, think. It will deprive our children of their own history to their detriment and ours. Finally, a people devoid of their own history will be a people easily controlled, easily redefined. They will never be wise. They will never be mature. They will never be courageous. These are the things we are seeing being stolen from our children. But it may be inevitable. Lee, Jackson, Grant, and Sherman would, to a man, stand in disgust at what we have become. In our gay pride flag draped Planned Parenthood t-shirt wearing smugness, we think ourselves so morally superior, when in reality, each one of those men would spit in disgust at the whole lot of us.
Wait, stop right there. Stop right there. Stop right there.
All right.
Well,
Gotcha. Sorry.
there
we go.
So that was the post, the one that I responded to. So in other words, he just read his piece, the article that was on his Facebook wall. And he's going to, in a moment, read my original wall post on my wall responding to that piece, right? But so far, what I want to do is I want to get everyone's input on what he just said. You know, in fairness, I want everyone to take note of something. No one in here is saying that one can't read up on Robert E. Lee's life, that we can't look into the history of the man, and that we can't even, in a sense, take an even-handed approach in regards to his life, right? If anyone goes to school and they read up on anything pertaining to the Confederacy or Robert E. Lee or anything like that, they're going to have to deal with his material, the material dealing with his life, with his background, et cetera, et cetera. He seems to be conflating the idea that when you deal with history, that you, as a Christian, and this is important, that we simply deal with it even-handed and that we ignore the precepts laid out in the scriptures that give us the correct approach that one should take when interacting with this topic in a public forum before other fellow image bearers who have a attachment to the topic based on the fact that, as we all know, this is an issue that is very sensitive for African Americans, right? And because of the climate that is taking place in this country, right? And because the individual who is making the remarks seemingly has an issue or has had an issue for a while now with people who are advocating for social reforms or social issues, social change as it pertains to fellow image bearers on the African American portion of the body of Christ. So he seems to ignore that. And he simply looks at it as this is PC culture, and anyone who is advocating for this is promoting totalitarianism, is promoting critical race theory, and doesn't look at it from the biblical standpoint of, obviously, number one, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 23 through 25, right? All things are lawful, but not all things are expedient, and that we should look for the things that build up our neighbor. And also Romans 14, that if there is something that causes our brother to stumble, not just merely in food and drink, but also in things that, because, in fact, I'll go ahead and pull that up if you guys don't mind, because I like to have a biblical basis for the things that I do. And that's not a shot at him. I'm simply saying we certainly don't just go about trying to correct people without the scriptures being our foundation. So Romans 14, and I'm going to go ahead and go down to the relevant verse if you guys give me a moment. So give me one moment. Give me one moment, guys. Basically, go ahead and, read verse 21. It is good not to eat meat or drink or wine or do anything that causes your brother to stumble, or do anything that causes your brother to stumble, right? I'm reading the ESV here. And just to be on the safe side, in case anyone says, well, I'll go ahead and read the NASB as well. NASB in verse 21 reads, it is good not to eat meat or drink wine or to do anything by which your brother stumbles, right? Now, we are believers that if we're doing something that is going to cause our brother to stumble, is going to become a hindrance to our brother or our sister, and it is an issue of sensitivity for them, even if we have the freedom and liberty to do so, it is not expedient for us to use that liberty to cause our brother or sister to stumble in what we consider lawful for ourselves, right? Whether it be food or drink or anything else, it could be any other thing. And so, for my panelists, I'm going to let you guys touch on this before we continue to go on to the video. What are your thoughts about what he said? These are my thoughts. I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, let me hit this one real quick. So,
You beat me
I
to
know
it.
Adam. I got to beat Adam to the punch. You know
You
what I
beat
mean?
me to it.
But so that clip, it seems to be his main point in that specific article that he quote of himself, is that because people are offended by certain points of history, they would like to censor recorded history. Funny enough, those of us who are of African descent have the same issue. We also don't like the fact when people try to censor history. For example, when a police officer is doing his job and he purposely turns off his body cam, well, he's censoring the ability to record history. So I have an issue with that. And there are many things that have been hidden away, or at least not brought to the full front of mainstream world, that have been censored because of certain people's offense. So I actually am in agreement. We should not censor recorded history. That's not the issue. The issue is there are certain things in history that should not be glorified or looked on with honor. You know, someone committed a massive tragedy. Should that be recorded? Absolutely. Should it be discussed and commented on? Absolutely. Should it be glorified? No. And that's the problem. The problem is not censoring history. The problem is there's certain parts of history that do not need to be honored or glorified, but they still need to be remembered nevertheless. I yield.
Excellent. That's really the interesting part for me, because later on in the video, he says something that mature people know how to categorize things. He says something to that effect. He talks about, he equates or associates maturity with the ability to make proper categorizations. And then you find at the same time that the centerpiece of his whole article is a conflation between memorializing and, you know, the handling of history. I'm saying, to your point, like you said, it's not an issue of, because later on he talks about how it's stealing history and all this kind of, he uses these kind of alarmist, you know, I guess maybe he sees himself as being like a Paul Revere or something like that, you know, against history stealing. I don't know, you know, but I find it interesting that somebody who you'll see later in this video talks about how he associates, again, maturity with properly categorizing things, puts out a piece where the central piece is he's improperly categorized. You know what I'm saying? And then he's lumped a whole bunch of leftists in here and all this kind of stuff to, you know, to sound the alarm, I guess, to people stealing history. And the fact of the matter is he's just flat out mistaken. As a matter of fact, can I share my screen right quick, Faithful?
Yeah, go right ahead, man.
Okay.
Real quick, if I could just add on one more thing to this. You know, I'm looking at the actual piece that he wrote, and when he mentions that, you know, we should look at history, I guess, basically from, as he says it, a balanced view, right? That basically people are trying to censor history and they're only trying to hear one narrative and not hear the whole picture. Now, we're going to hear the whole picture tonight as it pertains to Robert E. Lee. We're going to actually show both sides of the coin, right? We're going to be fair and show both sides of the coin. And I think, MJ, you already know. So the thing is, if we're going to be fair, let's be all the way fair. Let's show every aspect of the man. and not merely deal with the aspects that you find favorable. And at the same time, if you're going to write favorably about the man, don't be upset when you notice African Americans and Hispanic brothers and sisters in Christ calling you out on simply sharing the favorable elements and not necessarily showing the other side that makes a lot of us question the man. Ultimately, God alone knows his heart, what his ultimate fate is. And so we are not going to pronounce any sort of eternal judgment standing on the man. That is God and God's judgment alone to determine. But what we are going to say is that there is a reason, other than the fact that he led the Confederacy, which I believe just in and of itself for African Americans is already a cause of alarm and something that is a dark history in the narrative of African Americans in this country. And so what we want to do is present a balanced picture, and we also want him to understand why we feel the way that we do, right? Now, it's unfair for him to simply say that people who disagree with him, and it's not just this topic, for the audience out there, it's not just specifically the topic of Robert E. Lee. There are various other issues that we have when it comes to this topic with James White. It just so happens he picks literally the worst possible time in history. If you guys want to be just in current history, he picked the worst possible time to drop the piece. And it shows almost a lack of, I guess, like of awareness on his end of his surroundings, of what's going on in the world, that he would drop that at a time, knowing that he already has a reputation, of being someone who is not in touch with African American issues. So why would you drop that piece at the worst possible time with such a heightened climate? It really doesn't make any sense.
Can I jump in?
It's just careless.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. So
I want to jump in and say something too, because one thing that you find, throughout his commentary is that he, I guess chastises people for, essentially being emotional or being offended and all these kinds of things, like these kind of feeling oriented words. I'm saying he seems to have an issue with that. But if you look at the heart of his piece, it really boils down to sentiment on his end. I'm saying he's being sentimental and nostalgic about growing up, checking out Pickett's charge, having that piece of Confederate money, having that bullet from the war.
Right.
I mean, these are all sentimental nostalgia, types of things. Like he has this fondness. He has this fond sentiment toward whatever he believes the Civil War to have, whatever it means to him. He feels sentimental about it, right? Now, one thing I would say is, now obviously I don't share that, whatsoever. I'm from Virginia. I know all about Fredericksburg. I've been to Fredericksburg. I got family that lives like 30 minutes from there. I grew up going to Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania Mall, right down the road. I can tell you a lot about Fredericksburg, and I have no love for the Confederacy whatsoever, right? And I can give you historical reasons and moral reasons as to why. Now, let me just say at the outset, what is it about his sentiments that trump mine, or mine that trump his? It shouldn't really be either. You know what I'm saying? But I think that we have to point out here that the people like us who have concerns about him aren't the only ones who have some sort of feeling-based engagement with this subject matter. Obviously, he's got some feelings invested into this too. He feels that this is history that ought to be preserved in a particular sort of way, that accords with the fondness that he senses toward it. So with that being said, I also want to touch on two things. I'm not going to deal with the conflation because we already dealt with that. The central theme of his whole article is a conflation between history, or properly handling history, and memorializing. It's two different things, as BK pointed out. But to that point, you can't just say that everybody who is basically on our side of the conversation is just we're just offended, we're emotional, so on and so forth. You consider the mayor of Richmond, Virginia. His name is LeVar Stoney, mayor of Richmond, Virginia. Can y'all see that? Y'all can see it? Okay. This is a quote from the mayor, right, of Richmond, Virginia. LeVar Stoney says, "It's time to replace the racist symbols of oppression and equality. this is from my articles. I just kind of clipped it out. Richmond Mayor LeVar Stoney said during Thursday's announcement, referring to Governor Northam's announcement, he said Richmond is no longer the capital of the Confederacy, right? So at least this gentleman here is the mayor of Richmond is telling you the impetus behind why he believes this monument needs to be taken down, right? Because it's a symbol of oppression and inequality. Now, we have to understand that there is some subjectivity here. Now, obviously, James White might disagree. Those who are pro-Confederacy might disagree. But we have to understand that that's the nature of symbols. I'm saying symbols can mean different things to different people. That's the nature of them, There's a difference between, like, say, a stop sign. That's a symbol. It's explicit in terms of what that means versus, something like a memorial. Because depending on how you construe the history that memorial represents, you're going to construe that symbol or that memorial in a different manner, right? And so then the question becomes, we need to press past, just the sentimental aspect and how people perceive it and get to the root of the matter is what exactly is being memorialized. And when people sit back and say, well, gee, we, as a people today in Richmond, we're not the seat of the Confederacy anymore. And we don't want to memorialize people who represent the ugliest part, or at least one of the ugliest parts of America's history. And I'll come back to that in a second, but I just wanted to kind of put that out there is that, I think that he's totally misguided in where he's coming from. And one other point I want to make, if I could, I can make this real quick, but I just want to, I'm careful in saying this, and I'm going to be descriptive in what I mean. And I don't want to layer on moral language that in an unintended way. And I'll be more explicit in terms of what I mean. I'm not calling the man deceptive or a liar, but I do think in some of his articles, we see an interesting sleight of hand that I think somebody who's as rhetorically savvy as he is, I would be interested to see why he worded things the way that he did. Notice that he says, this is from his article. He says, I was born in Minneapolis and lived there in Pennsylvania. So the boys in blue were the good guys. When you think about good guys, you talk about in moral terms. They were on the right side of the moral issue that's being, fought out, in terms of the Civil War. Now listen to that. So he's talking in moral terms, the good guys. But, all right, that's a contravening term. But means in spite of what I just said, or maybe to the contrary of what I just said, here he's going to give another side of the coin. He says, but when we saw the statues of Lee and Longstreet, it never crossed my mind that they should be torn down. There were monuments to the men who fought here, right? Now, notice when he's talking about the people in the North, referring to, moral terms. They're the good guys. And then as far as, Lee and Longstreet, these are the folks who fought there. Well, that's just a statement of fact. Yes, they fought there. You know what I'm saying? But, that's not the issue that's being handled here. You know what I'm saying? I think he avoids in some way saying that, maybe Lee and Longstreet were the bad guys. Maybe he doesn't want to condemn them of that. But, I mean, the fact for somebody like myself, I find that kind of interesting. You know what I'm saying? Now, if we want to be consistent and talk about talking moral terms on both sides of the coin between the North and the South, I would say yay and amen. The North were the good guys. Why? Because ultimately, right, the protection of life is a first order moral issue, right? And when you have a system of chattel slavery wherein people's lives are being snuffed out at a whim of a slave master or whatever, or families are being sold down the river and all these kind of things that militate against the Imago Dei. I'll make this quick, because I don't want to monopolize the conversation. I'm saying, but when you have, people's lives are shortened by the nature of the work that they do, unpaid and so forth. Again, I think protection of life is a first oral moral issue that supersedes whatever legalities that people in the South believe that the North overstepped. And, they call the war of Northern aggression and things of that nature. I'm saying, I'm sorry, but your state charter is not as morally important or morally significant as respecting the Imago Dei. And in any way that you and your state overstep the Imago Dei, preservation of life, to me, whatever it is your whole shindig is becomes secondary to the preservation of life of Africans in this instance. So yeah, if we're talking in moral terms, yes, the South was the bad guys. It's a bad thing to rob people of their liberty and to subject it to unpaid labor, which shortens their lifespan, to sell their children down the river and so forth. And so I just think that I would have liked him to have kept that consistent rather than shifting from just moral terms to just a statement of fact that's ultimately inconsequential, I think, given the broader scope of the moral issue that we're dealing with here.
And if I could add, if I could just add, I feel that it's also unfair to simply make an appeal to Philemon or to make an appeal to the Old Testament servitude laws and to simply assert that because these things were permissible during a period of time, therefore the things that took place in antebellum South are somehow justifiable. And I'm not saying that James White is saying this. I'm just saying for anyone who would decide to make that sort of an appeal, the slavery that took place in this country was an inhumane slavery that goes against the very principles of the Old Covenant laws and also the example of someone like Philemon in the New Testament. Completely goes against that. It was an inhumane form of slavery that took place in this country. And unfortunately, Robert E. Lee led the side that essentially advocated for that form of slavery.
Brother, can I say something on that real quick? Just real briefly. I would just want to throw this question out there, right? In light of what you just said, right? It seems to me, and I could be wrong. I'm just throwing this question out, right? When James White says things like that, right? It seems to me that if he were just to be blunt and honest about where he stands on the issue, it appears to me that he's not as convinced as I am that the chattel slavery in the antebellum South was wrong, as an inexcusable and dead wrong. It appears to me that he's not as convinced as I am that individuals like Robert E. Lee did something reprehensible, in terms of their slave holding and everything associated with it, because it wasn't just holding people captive. You have rapes and all number of things. I would be interested to hear his perspective on that. To what extent does he believe that chattel slavery in the antebellum South was indeed wrong? And does he, or does he seem to think that there's some sort of mitigating factors that make it wrong, but maybe not as weighty, in terms of wrongness as somebody like myself would think it is? And I would wonder why. I'm just throwing it out there.
Right. I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Just in response to what Brother Adam just said, he did have a phrase in there where he basically calls him a man of his day. My interpretation of that is saying this is what was the status quo. This is the behavior that everyone engaged in. So, he also makes that verbiage of saying, let's not pull him from his time into our time and judge him by our standards, as though the morality of the issue has somehow changed over time, as though, now we're saying that it's wrong, but back then it wasn't wrong. Maybe back then it wasn't universally accepted, or people did not acknowledge whether it was wrong or not. But it's always been, wrong. But that's just to go to what you just said about him and his perception of the individual or the time period or the practice, because he calls him a man of his day, as if that's supposed to excuse the behavior in which he was engaged.
Actually, I got bars on that too. But do you want me to hold that till later, Faithful, or do you want me to go with it now?
You know what? Let's. If you want to, you can touch on it now, and then we can just continue.
Real quick,
okay,
Adam.
Cool.
Yeah.
To Neffy's point, that man of his time, that is almost like an escape mechanism for James White. And it's a convenient excuse for him to pretend to be neutral rather than to be to hold to the consistent biblical worldview that would have to say this or that is wrong. I mean, there is no neutrality when it comes to this. The biblical worldview transcends cultures. It transcends periods of times. That's why it's so powerful. So when James White runs to he was a man of his time, he abandons the Christian worldview and becomes a cultural relativist, which is a contradiction in terms. And he's a presuppositionalist. I know that they hate neutrality, so I would just challenge him not to be neutral when it comes to cultural morality.
Amen. I'm gonna piggyback on that if that's cool. I'm not gonna monopolize the conversation. I'll hurry it up, But I find it interesting that at the beginning of his talk, he talks about not taking like worldviews and concepts that are external to the biblical worldview and then applying them in matters like these. And then yet still he seems to love this notion of they were men of their time. He said it a couple of times here. And he also said this at the Sovereign Nations Conference, where they were dealing with social justice and so forth. He talks about there being men of their time then. Now, what does that really mean? Now, first of all, let's understand that sin is sin no matter when or in what context you practice it. Ontologically, all right? We have to distinguish between ontology and epistemology. Ontology deals with the nature of something, like what it is. Epistemology deals with what you know and how you know it, okay? Now, ontologically, something is a departure from God's nature, i.e. sin, whether no matter when and where it happens. You know what I'm saying? And temporally, just because something is in the past doesn't mean that it is somehow now less abhorrent, you know what I'm saying, or less sinful. And so when he talks about people being offended at individuals in the past or looking through the history to be offended at people, no, we're looking at history and we're taking note of things that were sinful then, and we're saying that was abhorrent, and we don't approve of it. Ergo, we won't memorialize it. So again, we have to make that distinction between ontology and epistemology. Now, I want to kind of steel man a little bit. I want to say if you was going to make an argument that somehow this men of their time idea is kind of grounded in scripture, you might want to appeal to something like, where Jesus talks to the Pharisees. Like, if you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. This is John chapter 9, verse 41. He said, Jesus says, if you are blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim that you can see, your guilt remains. Now, one could argue, that, okay, well, maybe if these individuals hadn't known, then, Jesus is saying they wouldn't be guilty of sin, but obviously they do know. Therefore, sin remains with them. And so that's an epistemological issue, what you know and how you know it, right? Now, here's the problem, for Robert E. Lee, is that, when you deal with the moral witnesses that were available to Robert E. Lee, there's at least 4 lines of moral witness against slavery, all of which, provide ample witness against, slavery. So let's go, obviously you have general revelation, which is timeless and universal. We all have a conscience that we were endowed with, right? So we can know what's right from wrong based upon that. And you actually do have individuals from the Enlightenment, or basically kind of reasoning from an Enlightenment perspective to arrive at the conclusion that slavery was wrong, right? But we can maybe go there another time. Also, you have special revelation, right? Let me just backtrack for a second. The reason why I mentioned the Enlightenment influence folks, because they would not have subscribed necessarily to the biblical worldview. They were just kind of tapping into what they believed to be right or wrong based upon the nature of man. So that you can see inklings of general revelation militating against slavery. That's the reason why I brought that up. Special revelation. By the time your boy Bobby Lee comes along, what I'm saying? There's certainly a number of notable preachers, right? White and black. William Lloyd Garrison comes to mind. William Wilberforce comes to mind. Frederick Douglass comes to mind. We can talk about a number of folks. Was Wesley? Had come before him. Or we're talking about people that's either before him or during his time that bore witness to the fact that slavery was a sin.
Virgin. And
on the basis of scripture, right? So then I'm gonna. Then you have immediate history. Anybody who's understood. Bobby Lee was a war man, right? Now, 2 wars that a lot of people don't talk about is the Barbary Wars, pertaining to the Barbary slave trade. And within the first generation of America's history, it fought 2 Barbary Wars, and they were fighting against North African nation states because these North African Muslims were capturing white people, Europeans, Americans, French, Danish, and so forth, and enslaving them in North Africa. And so America went to war with those folks because they recognized, look, we don't want our folks enslaved against their will. So America has no problem recognizing that slavery is a problem when it's their fault. I'm saying, or at least I should say the white people in America at that time recognized that, we don't want people that look like us enslaved. So we're going to go help them out while they were still enslaving Africans. Now, Bobby Lee being a war man, I'm pretty sure he would have been aware of that because it was only a generation or so before him. And, he comes from a long line, or he comes from a line of military men as well. And then you have his contemporaries. I mean, I kind of spoke on that a second ago, but you have those who were contemporaries, i.e. like everybody in the North, who was, intent upon ending slavery, speaking out against it as a moral witness as well. So you have at least 4 lines of moral witness from which Robert E. Lee could have drawn from and said, maybe slavery is not such a moral idea. Maybe I need to give this thing up. But he didn't. He continued to ignore those moral witnesses. And thus, again, this whole man of his time thing, it's bullcrap. Just to be completely honest, this man had more than enough moral witness to, in his time, from his contemporaries and before, by which he could have, made the right conclusion about chattel slavery, but he didn't. Therefore, in my book, he's not the kind of individual. I'm sorry, I don't memorialize people who do those kinds of things.
Right.
I'm just saying.
So how about we do this? How about we continue playing the video, and we'll keep going over all his the relevant points that he made. And as you guys are going to see in a little bit, there's clearly some things that he said that we feel, let's just say, went unaddressed in regards to points that we had made. Right, there were certain points that he clearly did not address in the original post on my Facebook wall. Although he's going to talk about that, but I'm going to go ahead and let him speak for himself. All right. Oh, you're muted, brother. I don't know. Yeah, you got to unmute. No, you got to go back. Yeah, you could go back 10 seconds and then just unmute. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Where is it?
Stolen from our children. But visions and actions, all the while recognizing the utter childish foolishness of dragging him into your time and missing the great things that we learned from him and from others. Lee, Jackson, Grant, Sherman.
Now, this is the article. If you could just go up a little bit further.
Easterner
we already played this portion
of the war. Sorry. You know that they all fought in the East. Can survive self-hatred, and that is to categorize, consider, think. It will deprive our children of their own history to their detriment and ours. Finally, a people devoid of their own history will be a people easily controlled, easily redefined. They will never be wise. They will never be mature. They will never be courageous. These are the things we are seeing being stolen from our children. But it may be inevitable. Lee, Jackson, Grant, and Sherman would, to a man, stand in disgust at what we have become. In our gay pride flag draped Planned Parenthood t-shirt wearing smugness, we think ourselves so morally superior, when in reality, each one of those men would spit in disgust at the whole lot of us.
Stop right there. Just very quickly, because we're going to let this play. But so he essentially uses as an association fallacy. I mean, one should be careful not to leap from cultural Marxists having concerns about sensitivities and racial tensions to concluding that everyone who has such concerns must therefore be a cultural Marxist or, a Planned Parenthood advocate or advocating for everything else that he mentioned. No one in here advocates for that. But for whatever reason, he seems to lump us in with those people precisely because he assumes that if they happen to have in certain aspects similarities in terms of their disagreements, that therefore if we have certain similarities, we are associated with them. When it's literally the fallacy of conflation, and also an association fallacy in that if you have these points of contention that these people have, it automatically puts you into the same category as them. You can't have conservative beliefs and then somehow have these sort of issues when it comes to social issues. It's insane to me to think that this is a man who is philosophically grounded. We've seen him in debates, and yet this was extremely, no offense to Dr. White or to Mr. White, it is completely sloppy on his end. This is sloppy.
If I might, I might just say something that'll get you in trouble, but I'm gonna just say it anyway. But I mean, just my general perspective, like when you have somebody who's really smart, logical, and so forth, and the majority of things that they try to address, and in one particular area they seem to always have these kinds of stumbling blocks and errors, then one of the things I kind of think about is maybe there's something of a non-rational nature that is the problem. Like maybe there's something that's a hard issue, maybe there's some sort of blind spot, that of an emotional sort, that draws them away or skews them for them otherwise ordinarily rational thinking. That's just kind of my perspective.
I too share that sentiment, Brother Adam.
Yeah, nephew.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, and to be fair, right, we all have blind spots.
Absolutely.
Right? We all have blind spots, no matter how righteous, no matter how long you've been walking with Christ, nobody's beyond correction. right? And again, just to reiterate what Faithful said in the beginning, this is not a bashing session against Mr. White at all. It's just because of, his influence. When he says things that are out of step, it can be detrimental to the community. And just like us, we all have our various platforms, and if we say anything that's out of step with the biblical worldview, someone needs to correct us, because nobody in this panel is above correction, So again, this is not, let's just beat up Mr. White. This is correction, and it's completely in love, but it's something that needs to be done, in love.
Can I just address this real quick to the brother Phil Fox? Shout out to the brother Phil. He says he believes this is where you are headed if you have these views. Just to be fair, I've watched many hours of Dr. White's teachings, and I want to say, but it's still in essence the slippery slope fallacy. To assume that because we hold to the views that we do, that somehow it's going to lead into us segueing into this cultural Marxism that he seems to be talking about is absolutely asinine. I mean, it's I think that we're a lot smarter than he is perhaps believing us to be. And so I think he should at the very least have more consideration for the intelligence of the people that he's disagreeing with, right? But if we could, let's continue playing this video. Let's continue playing the video, because I feel that there are a lot more interesting things that need to be addressed.
And as Adam cues that up, I would just say that, I mean, you had people long before Marx that had these concerns, like Charles Spurgeon, and if I'm a Marxist, he must be a Marxist as well, because he refused to come over here because of the barbaric nature of slavery.
Or the southern states, right? Because the southern states talk about the oppressions of the north, or the northern states, right? So they must have been, critical race theorists, because anytime you use the word oppression, all of a sudden it's associated with intersectionality, critical race theory, and so forth. So I guess just the mere use of those words lumps you in those categories. So the southern leaders must have been critical race theorists, or as a matter of fact, the founders of the nation. Because if you look at the Declaration of Independence, it talks about the oppressions of the King of England, right?
Yeah.
With taxation without representation, it uses that word oppression. So I guess if we're just going to be sloppy with it, then okay, well, I guess they were critical race theorists and they believed in intersectionality, and they were social justice warriors too, right? So now we got social justice warriors in the civil rights movement. Civil War for the South, and also in the Revolutionary War. It's just silly. I mean, it's really just. I mean,
it's very shallow.
It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It would be like, man, just because I believe there's one God and a Muslim believes there's one God, then I am a Muslim. That's how dumb it sounds. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's irrational. And so I just think that somebody, of his caliber should be more careful. But this is what happens when you don't take time to really work through these issues in proximity with individuals you disagree with, but you're just kind of lobbing bombs from afar. This is what happens. So I'm just saying.
Right. So let's continue playing this video. Yeah, definitely. Let's continue playing the video. And
all right.
The responses were very, very predictable. The responses are basically based on the idea that there is a modern narrative that simply cannot be questioned. You cannot you can't talk about stuff like this. You can't address doing history. You can't talk about things that time. It's very, very similar.
This is poisoning the well, and also a straw man of our actual position. I mean, this is a gross straw man, as you're going to see in a moment, but I'm going to let him finish. But it's unfortunate that he's already poisoning the well, and on top of that, straw manning what it is that we're actually saying in regards to him being more measured and more careful in his approach. But let's go ahead and continue playing this, my brother.
Similar to the situation in Germany. I discovered about 2 years ago that my friends in Germany know nothing about World War II. Nothing. In the public education system, and there is no private education system, you have to go to the public schools in Germany. There's no homeschooling. It's not allowed. They'll take your kids away from you if you try. In Germany, you are basically, you do history up until Hitler. Then you're told Hitler was bad, we were bad, and then you pick up someplace in the 50s, maybe late 40s. But you don't, the mid 30s to the mid 40s just disappear. You don't know anything about it. There's no discussion of it. It's just terrible, bad, go on from there. Well, what that does is when you treat people that way, people are going to start looking for themselves, and they may not find the best sources. And so it's just foolishness to approach it that way, but that's how it's done in Germany, and that's what's now being done here. There is one narrative. All the guys in the North were great. All the guys in the South were bad. It was all about one subject. That's it. Period. End of discussion. No one who's done any serious study in the field would ever say that, but that's what you now have to say. And so when you start tearing down monuments, and I don't know when they're going to get to Gettysburg. I mean, there's a huge monument of Lee in Gettysburg facing it. That's where you start the walk. That's where you start Pickett's Charge, is at the Lee Monument across to the copse of trees there in at the Union lines. When's that one going to get torn down? Eventually, will you only have monuments on the one side of the battlefield, and all the monuments on the other side of the battlefield will have been torn down out of political correctness? Because someone will be offended by that? As I pointed out, this is a stealing of history. And to be mature in your thinking is to be able to categorize things. Let me give an example. In textual criticism, we used to have, and it's, who knows what's going to happen in the future, but we used to have something called the Alexandrian text. You have the Byzantine text, Alexandrian text, Caesarean Western. Caesarean Western definitely have gone the way of the dodo by now, but Alexandrian text, very, very common in textual critical materials, though, like I said, CBGM may end up removing that as a valid category. We don't know yet. We'll know over the next probably 5 or 6 years. Anyway, where does that name come from? Well, Alexandria, Egypt. Alexandria, Egypt, one of the most important cities in the ancient world. One of the locations of one of the greatest libraries in all of world history. I mean, Cleopatra and all that stuff, Roman history and everything tied up in Alexandria, Egypt. Where'd the name come from? Well, Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, King of Macedonia, unifies Greece in his early 20s, barely in his early 20s, and begins a campaign at the head of a Macedonian army. He would never return to Greece. He never returned to Greece. Once he left and invaded Persia, invaded Asia Minor, which was controlled by the Persians, he never came back because he died at 33. He was gone for that amount of time. But he created an empire that stretched from Greece to India, inclusive of Egypt, all the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, all that land, pretty much everything that they knew in the world at that time.
Wait, can you pause this?
That's why he was called Alexander the Great. And there are a lot.
Shout out to the brother Anthony. He says, being mature he says, now, in quotation marks, being mature means to categorize things, yet he doesn't know how to make distinctions and would lump those who disagree with him as cultural Marxists when that's not the case at all. And now he's going into basically giving us a history lesson. He seems to think that our disagreement with him means that we want to completely ban people from reading up anything regarding Robert E. Lee. It's a complete straw man of what it is that we're actually saying. I want the audience to catch this. James White is straw manning the heck out of us right now.
It's a very beautiful straw man. It almost walks on its own. Very detailed straw man.
It's almost as good as the straw man that he has on the Dividing Lines. I don't know if you guys watched the old ones when he used to have that straw man. It's almost as good as that one, man. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really odd to me because anyone who who is socially conscious, for lack of a better term, I think we pride ourselves in engaging history. I think we pride ourselves in studying deeper than what is typically offered to us at face value. And so it's the irony of him bringing up Alexander the Great and Alexandria and the library and the location without going into the other part of the story, without talking about the relevance of Alexander the Great, for example, being in a location that is not indigenous or native to his own, it's not where he's from. And the people there, I just find it such a crazy parallel that the people there were colonized and oppressed, and this great library, without mentioning any of their contributions. He talks about Rome. He talks about Alexander the Great being a Greek. What about the Egyptians? Are there no Coptic writings in Alexandria? And so this is the position that African Americans and minorities find ourselves in the classroom every single day, from elementary through college. We are trying to put ourselves or find ourselves in the footnotes of history and elaborate on those things. So we're not saying to turn away from or erase Robert E. Lee's story. We're saying, let's talk about the slave children that Washington had that nobody tells us about. Let's talk about the other side of the story that keeps getting swept up under the rug. We want to be more candid about what's happened in history as opposed to hiding it. And so because it's kind of like the Black Lives Matter argument, I hate to bring it into this conversation, but it is what it is. Because we're highlighting an issue that has not been sufficiently addressed, it seems as though that's the only thing we're focused on. We don't need to talk about him being a Confederate leader and the great things that you're saying he's done, because we were already taught that. This is a basis, the basic minimum, a foundational principle that we all understand because we were all taught those things. Okay, now let's take the conversation a bit further and talk about the things that are not so pretty that you don't like to discuss. So again, I just find it a little ironic, and I don't want to call it disingenuous because I don't know his intentions, but I do think that it's strange to say that we don't like history and we don't, you can't talk about those things. No. To the contrary, we're saying let's talk about them, and everybody else is saying, okay, leave that part of history alone because it stirs up emotions.
Hey, matter of fact, can I add some more irony on this? You made a beautiful point. So check this, right? Well, I think it's hilarious. He's talking about Germany, right? He's like, you can't have homeschool and so forth, and they don't talk about Hitler and that era of history and so on. And he made an interesting statement. He said that when you treat people like that, then they go looking for their own sources, and sometimes those sources aren't the best. Yeah, James White, that's why we have an urban apologetics community. That's exactly right. Because throughout church history here in the West, only one side of church history has been told, which is primarily the European side. That's why we have to tell people about Tertullian. That's why we have to tell people about Augustine, which y'all want to paint as a white dude. Not y'all, but Europeans have painted as a white dude for centuries. You know what I'm saying? To be explicit. I mean, that's why we have to deal with these kind of things. Precisely what you're talking about. That's why we have all these clowns running around talking about Jesus was based on Horace. Because the church hasn't properly treated the breadth of Christian history, church history, individuals, particularly in the African American and minority context, are going to other sources, typically the internet, YouTube, and so forth, and they end up going to bad sources and they're walking away from the faith. That's why we're here. And so bringing it around, that's why it's important not to memorialize an individual like Robert E. Lee, because we want to listen. We wouldn't have to redirect, people's understanding of history if it was properly recorded and handled in the first place. If it wasn't the case that every 5 seconds we have to hear about all the great things America did and people would just sweep the other stuff under the rug, then we wouldn't have to go back and draw people's attention to the other side. We wouldn't have to do it.
And you know something real quick, and so we can continue playing the video. It simply is a straw man on his end. And he's essentially ignoring the fact that the central point was that one would take a more measured approach. One would be a little more careful in how one presents information, and which we're about to see in a moment, because he's going to read the post on my Facebook. So if we could, let's go ahead and continue playing this, and you guys are going to see in a moment. You guys are going to see why I'm laughing right now in a moment. All right, go ahead.
Lots of Alexandrias. That one in Egypt just happens to be the best known, but He's tended to like his name. And so there are all sorts of Alexandrias that he founded all the way out to India. That's why we have a Greek New Testament. That's why we have a Greek New Testament. Nobody was speaking Greek in Israel before Alexander came through. But he created the Greek world that then Rome, in essence, inherited. And that's why your New Testament's written in Greek, is thanks to Alexander the Great. Now, he's called the Great. But I just finished a lengthy biography about Alexander. And you need to understand, the Greek Empire was built on the back of absolute chattel slavery. He enslaved probably millions of people. He killed hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And nobody in the history of the United States can come close to Alexander the Great in guilt for slavery at all. Not even. It's trying to make a comparison is just silly. I mean, just look at the size of the United States in comparison to the land mass that he conquered and the number of people that he conquered is not even close. So there are statues literally from Greece to India, north, south, down into Egypt, of Alexander the Great. Shall we begin the destruction now? No, because that was 2,300 years ago, and nobody cares, right? So I guess it depends on how far back you want to be looking, though that had far more impact across the world. The Romans, you name someone, you saw the videos yesterday in London? Police running away because, of course, they've been disarmed. Not all police in London are disarmed, but the regular bobbies are.
Wait, can you pause this?
They've got the guys with guns. I've seen them.
I mean, he's still going on and on. It's like he's essentially just strawmanning everything. You know, that basically he seems to think that this is about a statue for us or something like that. He's making the argument central on the idea of like somehow we were like, James White, we disagree with the fact that you wrote that article because you mentioned something about a statue. What really it has to do is the insensitivity in talking so fondly about a man without painting the broader picture, because he only showed, he in his mind, he thinks everyone just sees Robert E. Lee as this bad guy just because, right? And then he decides, well, what you guys are going to see in a moment, he paints him out to be almost like this beacon of Christianity based on his particular statements in certain writings. But what he doesn't do is he doesn't look at the broader picture, that there's various sides to the man. Right now, he says we have to paint history with a balanced picture, right? It can't just be the good. It also has to be the ugly, right? He seems to think that we're somehow against the idea of having a balanced view of history when, I mean, that's the whole point. We have a balanced view of history, and that's precisely why we believe that the narrative about Robert E. Lee, the bad side, also needs to be put out there so that people can make so that people can have a balanced view of who he was, right? That it's not just one-sided.
We're about to tip the scales here in a minute.
Yeah.
Let's just go. Matter of fact, can we do this when he? Because I don't know if he's gonna bring him up in a moment, but because he's gonna go into my wall post on Facebook. If we can, Matthew, if you could have those on deck so we can bring those right out, because I think it's fair if he's going to present one side, we need to present the other side to give people a balanced view. Of course, that's how we do history, right? We have to present both sides of the coin. And no one is denying what he said about him having a military acumen and all those things, I don't think anyone would deny that he was a excellent tactician in terms of his military prowess. But as far as the man was concerned, he still fought for a side that advocated for an inhumane form of slavery, even if he himself, this is important, even if he himself did not partake in it. And I'm not saying, I'm simply putting it out there as a, just to be on record, even hypothetically, even if he himself didn't partake in that inhumane slavery, let's say he himself didn't abuse his slaves, he still fought for a side that had men who did abuse their slaves, who did advocate for an inhumane form of slavery. And it is a history that affected African-American lives. There is no question that the history of antebellum South affected African-American lives, and he led the side that precisely was advocating for that form of slavery. I mean, it is what it is. Let's just call it how it is. Why is it that he only wants to show? I don't know. At this point, let's just. I'll let you guys get your points in, and then we can continue watching this, because I feel like if I'm going to definitely be here all night on just this one point. But
well, I mean, to your point though, I mean, just real quick, as far as if anybody questions, Virginia, because Robert E. Lee's from Virginia, and many want to say that, oh, he was just fighting to save his family or protect his family or whatever. When Virginia seceded, the Articles of Secession, said that they were that Virginia was basically rising up, not only because of the injury, quote, of the people of Virginia, but to the oppression of the southern slaveholding states. So that word slaveholding is in there for a reason. It didn't say southern states; it says southern slaveholding states, right? It's in there for a reason. So you can't just dissociate Robert E. Lee and whatever, from the slaveholding aspect of their cause. You just can't do that, And I just think that's interesting. And it's to your point. I mean, I'll leave it at that, because I know we want to move forward. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. All right.
I don't know where they were yesterday, but they were being driven away by Black Lives Matter's hooligans and thugs. And they were getting ready to deface and tear down the Churchill Monument. The Churchill Monument. I've got pictures of it on my phone. I was watching those videos, ran those streets, those very same locations, took pictures of where everything was going on just last year. Beautiful, beautiful place. I'm not sure if it will be for long, but beautiful, beautiful place.
By the way, can you pause that for a moment?
Yeah.
Just very quickly. Just I want to say, no one here advocates for any sort of public defacing of monuments or anything like that. Even if we disagree with the people who are being defaced, we don't advocate for that sort of aberrant behavior. So everything that he's saying, none of this has to do with us. This is not applicable to us. So there's really no need to even mention this as if somehow we're advocating for this idea of defacing public property or anything like that. We're not promoting anything even remotely close to that at all. Right. All right. So let's go continue playing.
But while we're at it, I'll just throw it out there for people to look up. Go Google when you have a chance. Winston Churchill, 1943 Bengal famine. Winston Churchill, 1943 Bengal famine, because apparently, Brother White here thinks that it's just Winston Churchill's disparaging remarks that people have concern with. No, his policies contributed greatly to the starvation of 2 to 3 million Indians. So I just want to throw that out there if people want to do further research, but okay.
All right. Yep.
Things about Indians, not American Indians, Indian Indians, the other side of the world. So tear it down, because somebody would be offended. Now, the fact that you're not speaking German is also due to Churchill, but hey, we just have to follow the narrative, right? I mean, there are a bunch of people involved and you're not speaking German. But you'll never know that if you don't study history in the context in which history took place. Once you allow a narrative and human emotion and offense to become the filter through which history is looked at, we're back to 1984 again, as in the Orwellian view of 1984, where history becomes this pliable, editable, changeable thing that is always meant to fit the current narrative. That's what 84 was about. Read it. What was Winston doing? Winston was editing newspaper articles. They used to have, there would be somebody that they had written a newspaper article about who was a hero to the fatherland, but now he's been executed. So what do? You don't think people can learn from that? No, you go back and you put somebody else in. You put somebody else's face in, somebody else's name in. That person just disappears, so that the narrative becomes the all in all. Ministry of Truth, it was called. Ironic term. That was the whole point. Just like the Newspeak Dictionary. It's meant to be ironic. And yet we are now facing it. Not only in culture, not only have we elected these people to office, and they are now acting upon their convictions, but it's in the church.
Hey, Mike, can I say something real quick?
Yeah, go ahead, man. I mean, that's straw man, bro. Hey, man, his straw man game is on point, bro.
It's crazy. I'm gonna make this real quick. So,
man,
notice one thing that James White consistently does is he presupposes that his understanding or what he believes to be the right telling of history is indeed, correct, and we're trying to present as some sort of alternative rendition of history. And I think there's a very key presupposition. I think he's mistaken about that. The issue is that what we're saying is that really folks have not been telling the proper history to begin with. You know what I'm saying? And what we're trying to enter into the conversations are correctives based upon actual history. And so he says all these things about, what we can learn from them and all this kind of stuff. Well, yeah, that's the reason why we're tearing down the monument. It's because what we've learned about Robert E. Lee is that he's not the kind of guy that our Southern history teachers told us that he was. And that he was far more of a heinous individual than somebody that we feel comfortable lauding and esteeming in public spaces. So it's not that, we can't learn from them. It's that based upon what we have learned about them, we understand that they are no longer rightfully placed in our public spaces in some sort of memorializing fashion. Therefore, we're going to take them down. So it's not about what we can't learn. It's about what we have learned. That's what's that issue here.
Yeah.
All right. Just want to say that. Thank you.
All right.
It's in the church as well. And so now everything's about the narrative. Churches that have shut down and will not meet because of the panic of 2020 will send their people to BLM, Antifa rallies and protests on the Lord's Day. Wow. Okay. So that was the article. It is a serious, it's making
Can you stop it for a minute? Can you stop it for a minute?
About the important.
That's a lie. Like, what, how does he know that? Did he go to my church and hear that? Like, where did he hear that from? That we're not going to worship God together collectively in an organic sense, but we're going to go to Black Lives. Where does he get that? Like, can someone put me onto that? Like, is that true? I don't want to say, let me retract that. I don't know if he's lying or not. I've never heard that. Is that true? Can someone, I don't get that.
Well, I mean, let's say that it is true. Let's say that there is some church somewhere where that occurred, right? The question is, is he rightfully characterizing all of those folks who are making these critiques in that group of individuals? I certainly wasn't marching with Black Lives Matter and Antifa.
Nor was I.
I wasn't, called out to go march with them on the Lord's Day, and I still take issue with what he's saying. So again, this goes back to, and this is what James White does, man. It's real shifty. I hesitate to use that word, but I feel like it's he uses methods that aren't rightly capturing the conversation. I'll put it that way, in the sense that he's
Well,
constantly
can I say this?
with others, constantly associating us with others to which we have no association.
Right.
Stay focused on the critique and those who are critiquing you, bro.
Exactly.
Well, this is the way I look at it is, and I believe that it's his perception of what our issue is completely off. He doesn't seem to understand what our actual issue is. Rather, he's assuming, he presupposes what our issue is based on whatever presuppositions he has regarding these other groups that he has issues with. And he assumes that we have the same view as those groups. So therefore, whatever those groups believe, we must believe. And basically, we're just linear in our positions. And that couldn't be further from the truth. But he's about to go into the post right here. So let's look at this, man. Let's take a listen to this.
All right.
Of honesty in history. But Christians then sent me this. Like I said, Mike Pereira, is it Pereira? I don't know who Mike is with Cab Malone, Vocab Malone, and 71 others.
All right, stop right there. I just got to do this. Mike Pereira, or if you want to be a little more, Mike Pereira. It just is what it is, man. I mean, he been watching Sakari videos, man. I'm telling you, man. No, I'm just playing. I'm just playing, man. I'm just playing. They be
tearing that name up.
Nah, because
the following.
All right. Let's go ahead and listen.
Spirit of Proverbs 27:5 in mind. For a while now, you've made statements that can only be perceived as careless regarding social issues. These statements have offended many Black and Hispanic brothers and sisters in Christ. While I don't believe that you've done this intentionally, you haven't exactly been receptive to correcting these missteps. The piece below, which was the article I just read to you, is yet another example of this carelessness from your end. This needs to stop, as it is tarnishing your reputation before the eyes of fellow image bearers who have been purchased by Christ's precious blood. Remember the words of Hebrews 12:14, Romans 12:10 through 18, and James 3. Please do not brush these words under the proverbial rug of the easily offended. Consider the perspective of those in the body who are calling for you to take a more measured approach in what you say. And that's it.
Hey, stop right there. So, did anything that I say, I mean, if we're just being honest here, I didn't say, oh, you're a evil man, Mr. White. You're just, I was very favorable. I approached him in a very, very cautious, and because of course I'm looking at the piece and I'm seeing where he's being careless in doing this during a time. I mean, of all the time that all the moments in time that you could think of, why now do you decide to post an article precisely on Robert E. Lee? I mean, you couldn't wait? You couldn't wait till things cooled down a little bit? You were like, you know what I mean? It really doesn't make any sense to me. And so I'm saying to take a more measured approach, more calculated approach. If you feel the need to share something, and furthermore, you're the kind of person, everyone in here knows this, right? James White has had issues in the past with various members of the urban apologetics community, right? For example, Eric Mason and various others, where there have been issues, right? And he's been very vocal about his disagreements, and sometimes when he goes into the topic of social issues, he doesn't seem to be as nuanced as he is with, say, for example, Yasser Qadi, right? The Yasser Qadi incident that took place, he was very careful, very measured in not only how he approached him, but how Christian brothers and sisters needed to approach people like Yasser Qadi in the Muslim community. But for whatever reason, when it comes to particular Christians, specific Christians, the same level of charity doesn't seem to be there in terms of approach, in terms of how we are represented. He seems to be very inaccurate in his depiction of us. And he seems to conflate us with, essentially the world, with secularism. And nothing could be further from the truth. But let's continue listening to this, brothers. You know what I mean? And then this way we can segue right into the points that I believe he didn't actually address in the
bro. I feel like he took a jab, like when I can't remember if he said it yet or he's going to, but he talks about perceptions. Like I think he used the word perceived or something like that. Like, I mean, the way when I read your post, what I saw was applying just basic social skills. Like rather than just being outright accusatory and lambasting him, you use words like perceived and things like that to kind of soften the blow to come to the man with meekness. But for whatever reason, this individual, for whatever reason, James White is confusing meekness with some sort of emotionalism. Whereas really, I took it as, you're just trying to show the man respect, rather than just, chopping his head off. You use words like perceived and I feel that, or so on and so forth. And so I think it just, I feel like I just didn't like that, man. I thought that was an unfair characterization of how you approach it.
And everyone in here knows me. We've had conversations in private. Would any of you perceive me to be the sort of person who bases my thoughts off of emotions?
No.
Anyone in here?
No.
All the time.
Would all of you
No.
would you guys perceive me to be the kind of person who can at times even be logical and rational to a fault?
Yeah. And I'll take it a step further, Mike. And I hope you don't but I mean, you're a fiery dude. You know what I'm saying? So like, I think he doesn't really know you. He doesn't know your work. I mean, you came to him on the humble. And I respect
super
that.
humble.
I respect that. But I know how, if you wanted to, you could have got in that bag and really, really blasted him. You know what I'm saying? But I think it's unfortunate that he took your meekness for some sort of emotionalism. Man. I think that's real unfortunate.
Right. Yeah, but let's continue listening to this.
And my immediate response here, I'll give you the response that I provided in the thread. Greetings. I just encountered this, but I missed the part where, one, you showed anything false in the historical data I provided. Two, provide any biblical basis for the accusation of sin and the application I made regarding the need to do history properly. Or three, provide a biblical basis for the confusion of offense with violation of biblical standards. I am copying this and we respond fully on Monday's dividing line, but perhaps you could explain what specifically was wrong with the post? You said it was not measured. It was quite measured, in fact. So where was the sinful statement? Or is it possible that it is just impossible for anyone to conceive of how one might believe one should accept history as it was and not attempt to rewrite it? Or is it not possible to learn from those of the past, even if you find their personal beliefs erroneous? I fully understand why social justice folks who have embraced the totalitarian thinking of intersectionality and critical race theory would militate for a closing down of historical thought and inquiry. But you are approaching me as a Christian. I keep asking all those brothers and sisters who do so to open their Bibles and provide a consistent foundation, one that comes from sharing the same hermeneutic whereby we define and defend the Trinity, the resurrection, etc., that would lead me to embrace these modern constructions that are not derived from a Christian worldview, but from a secular one. Is that what this is all about? I look forward to your response. Now, I got overwhelmed with stuff that just went all over the place, a lot of great emotionalism. If Mike responded, I didn't see it. There was just a lot of stuff, and Facebook.
Wait, stop right there. So let me actually give. You can pause the video. Let me give Mr. White my response. So this was my response.
Yo,
now,
hold on. Yo, that strong man is about 7 feet tall. Is wearing Jordan 3s. and Versace shades right now. Straight up. Go ahead.
Yo, real quick, can one of you go to the wall post and share it in here so everyone can see for themselves that I actually did respond to Dr. White or Mr. White on my Facebook wall. And I actually tagged him in twice in 2 posts because I was feeling like, he said that he if he hadn't cleared his notifications, he initially wouldn't have seen the original wall post. But for whatever reason, I tagged him in twice, and he still, for whatever reason, didn't get a chance to see it. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. All right? I'm going to be charitable to him. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Okay, he didn't see the wall post. So I'm going to read it. And I want the audience to be the judge. All right? So if, to the brothers, one of the brothers, if you guys could share the wall post, I would appreciate it. This way the audience can actually follow along. Because I want this to be on record. I don't.
I'm bringing. I got it.
Okay.
You want the response to his response, right?
Yes, and I made it because I posted it twice. So if you actually go in there, it should be one of the. It should be of.
I got it. You want me to? I can share my screen. I have it.
Yes, absolutely. Let me go ahead and stop screen sharing over here. You got to stop. Yeah, there you go. All right. All right.
All right. So
let me go ahead and pull up the screen share. There we go. All right. Oh, you got to make that bigger, brother. Yeah, you got to make that.
I don't know how to do that. I don't know.
You can't like zoom in. You can't zoom in. Let me actually.
I've never asked it before. Yeah. I don't know how to
do it. Just zoom in as much as you possibly can, and then this way, I'll go ahead and start reading right now. So. But at least the audience knows that it's there. But
okay. Wait, let me see. I can.
So while you're doing that, I'll go ahead and start reading. Greetings to you as well, Mr. White. I appreciate you for taking the time to respond. The following are my counterpoints to your remarks. Your comments are in brackets. My counterpoints are beneath them. Right. So I started off with his first point where he says, let me go ahead and just share the screen where it says right here, where is it? Okay. I just encountered this, but I missed the part where you showed anything false in the historical data I provided. My response was, the issue is not the historical data, Mr. White. The issue is the seeming sympathy you have for the main leader of the Confederacy, a side which advocated for an inhumane form of slavery that affected many African-American lives, and the utter insensitivity you have towards Christians you disagree with regarding social issues and basically dismissing them all as oversensitive liberals who are purportedly promoting totalitarianism, critical race theory, and communism, which I find funny since I'm not a liberal, nor do I hold to any of those other views. My views are conservative. I think you need a bit of an open heart and a spirit of understanding to see that everybody's experience is not yours. And I find this especially saddening because you're one of the biggest influences on my apologetics and approach. It's not always a head knowledge problem, but an issue of understanding others. Now, this is the second point. Provide a biblical basis for the accusation of sin in the application I made regarding the need to do history properly. Again, it's not about historical accuracy or anything of the sort. This is a matter of writing about a particular topic, and perhaps, and this is in parentheses, and perhaps commenting on other issues which certain Christians find offensive. 1 Corinthians 10:23-24. All things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. Let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. Hence why I sincerely believe you're missing the point here. You're choosing to be divisive in your lack of consideration for your fellow brothers and sisters in Christ because it is not your own experience. Remember, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Ironically, you're the same man who insists on dissuading people from making broad generalizations against Muslims and are constantly encouraging people to keep a level of sensitivity towards them, but not particular Christians and their issues. That is the era of partiality. The least you can do is take the time to discuss those issues like you did with Yasser Qadi. In that sense, I meant discussing the issues in a formatted discussion. One second. Remember that you've complained in the past about others misrepresenting you, particularly during the whole Yasser Qadi incident. Yet you don't seem to have that same level of charity for those who disagree with your take on social issues. This is unfortunate considering that I was among those who defended you against the unfair criticism you received for the Yasser Qadi system. And this is his third point. And this is a little long, so I'm just gonna, deal with the first portion. Provide a biblical basis for the confusion of quote unquote offense with violation of biblical standards. I am copying this and will respond fully on Monday's dividing line, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He says, you said it was not measured. It was quite measured, in fact. So where was the sinful statement? Or is it possible that it is impossible for anyone to conceive of how one might believe one should accept history as it was and not attempt to rewrite it? Or is it not possible to learn from those of the past, even if you find their personal beliefs erroneous? I fully understand why social justice folks who have embraced the totalitarian thinking of intersectionality and, et cetera, critical race theory have, so I'm going to get to my response because you already heard him. He explained himself. This isn't about a sinful statement per se. Again, this is more an issue of insensitivity on your part in expressing apparent sympathy for an enemy general who led a side that advocated for the slavery of Black people, including the forefathers of your peers, such as Vodi Bakum. I believe this is a Romans 14 type of issue, where even if your statements aren't necessarily false in regards to his acumen of being a sharp military tactician, they're a stumbling block and a cause for unnecessary division amongst you and your Black and Hispanic brethren who find the praise of anyone who fought for the Confederacy to be offensive. But allow me to use the following as an example to help illustrate this point. And I want the audience to catch this. We can theoretically agree that Hitler was a great tactician. However, it would be highly inappropriate and extremely unwise to sing his praises in front of Jewish brethren in Christ. So yes, it is lawful in itself to say such things, but not expedient to exercise your freedom to the point of causing brethren to stumble, which ultimately can become a sin at a certain point. I'd like to conclude this portion by saying that I consider you to be an amazing apologist, and your sermons have helped me through tough times. But you really need to stop being so dismissive of brethren who share these criticisms by boxing them in with Marxists. I hope you will be balanced in considering these words. Now, of course, he didn't get a chance to actually check out my comments, so it is what it is. But at the end of the day, I was very fair and balanced in my response to him. I didn't attempt to strawman him, and I simply dealt with the salient points that he raised and, addressed his questions. And I find it unfortunate that he did not have at least the time to go through the entire comment section and at least try to find the post, where I actually addressed his questions and I actually, raised counterpoints, which I felt would have been useful in this sort of dialogue. Now, I know that my brother MJ had a discussion with him, and we're going to go ahead and talk about that because he kind of, let's just say he responded to MJ. In fact, if you could pull that up, Alfredo, if you could actually pull that up, we can actually deal with that too. I'm going to read the comment because he's going to talk about it. He's going to go on for a little bit more, but I certainly want to go ahead and deal with that now. So let's go ahead and just get right into it. So MJ had responded to Mr. White's post where he was addressing me. And so this was, if I can actually get, it's actually the response is in the comment that Mr. White left on the wall post. So let me actually find it and I will read it. Yeah. So I will go ahead and read Mr. White's. No, it's actually okay. Here we go.
I can share my screen again. You want me to show it?
Yeah, you can share your screen. Absolutely. And so, yes. And so this was Matthew Jackson, our brother MJ in here. This was his response. All right. He says, James R. White, It seems to me that you are let me make sure this is the okay. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. James R. Wright. It seems to me that you are engaging in projection when you speak on the shallowness of thought and the understanding of history. It is really an exercise in special pleading to insist that these guys were men of their time when guys like Spurgeon and others protested to the contrary. But let's take a deeper look, because I don't think there was anything Christian about Lee other than he said that he was a Christian and he was a loser who lost the war at that. You made a statement about historians, what historians think of him, about him. I would just want to fact check you to make sure that you have a robust understanding of history and are not thinking about Lee in an emotional manner, which it seems like. I digress. Let's look at Lee. Lee's cruelty as a slave master was not confined to physical punishment. In reading The Man, the historian Elizabeth Brown Pryor's portrait of Lee through his writings, Pryor writes that Lee, quote, ruptured the Washington and the Custis tradition of respecting slave families by hiring them off to plantations, and that by 1860, he had broken up every family but one on the estate, some of whom had been together since Mount Vernon days. The separation of slave families was one of the most unfathomably devastating aspects of slavery, and Pryor wrote that Lee's slaves regarded him as, quote, the worst man I ever see, end quote. Here are more details on the following. Following the death of his father-in-law, George Washington Parke Custis, in 1857, Lee assumed command of 189 enslaved people working the estates of Arlington, White House, and Romancook. Custis' will stipulated that the enslaved people that the Lee family inherited be freed within 5 years. Lee, as executor of the Custis will and supervisor of the Custis estates, drove his newfound labor force hard to lift those estates from debt. Concerned that the endeavor might take longer than the 5 years stipulated, Lee petitioned state courts to extend his control of the enslaved people. The Custis bond people, aware of their former owner's intent, resisted Lee's efforts to enforce stricter work discipline. Resentment resulted in escaped attempts. In 1859, Wesley Norris, his sister Mary, and their cousin George Parks escaped Maryland, where they were captured and returned to Arlington. In an 1866 account, Norris recalled, "We were immediately taken before General Lee, who demanded the reason why we ran away. We frankly told him that we considered ourselves free. He then told us that he would teach us a lesson we never would forget. He then ordered us to the barn where, in his presence, we were tied firmly to the post by Mr. Gwynn, our overseer, who was ordered by General Lee to strip us to the waist and give us 50 lashes each, excepting my sister, who received but 20. We were accordingly stripped to the skin by the overseer, who, however, had sufficient humanity to decline whipping us. According to Dick Williams, a county constable, was called in, who gave us the number of lashes ordered. General Lee, in the meantime, stood by and frequently enjoined Williams to lay it on well, an injunction which he did not fail to heed. Not satisfied simply lacerating our naked flesh, General Lee ordered the overseer to thoroughly wash our backs with brine, which was done. Same courts in 1858 and 1862 denied Lee's petition to indefinitely postpone the emancipation of his wife's enslaved people and forced him to comply with the conditions of the will. Finally, on December 29, 1862, Lee officially freed the enslaved workers and their families on the estate, coincidentally 3 days before the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect. It seems to me that you have a surface level or shallow understanding of both Lee and history. So that was our brother MJ, and this was Mr. White's response. Simple question. Were all slaveholders false professors? And would that include Philemon? I've saved your comment for the dividing line, so I'd like your response. Ironically enough, he didn't actually show our brother MJ's comment during the dividing line, as you guys are going to see in a moment. And so MJ responds, only God knows if they were truly saved, but we can know if some of them were by their fruits. Nevertheless, let's stay focused on Lee, and I hope that you address his behavior towards blacks before the Civil War, during the Civil War, and after the Civil War. Be consistent, Dr. White, and go beyond a surface level understanding of history when it comes to the savage that you hold up to be a hero. Right? So Dr. White didn't actually show our brother MJ's quote. He didn't show my quote. And I feel that it's unfortunate because it would have definitely painted a completely different picture than the one that I believe James White was presenting in his dividing line show. So I feel that it was a bit disingenuous on his end, at the very least, not to show MJ's comment. And he didn't read my comment. I'll give him that, right? I ended up responding late. If I'm not mistaken, I believe I responded a day later. But I mean, why not show MJ's quote? MJ made some really good points.
Can I say something on that real quick? Or
yeah,
hold up my little piece of paper. Facts.
I'll just share my screen. One thing that we find common in James White when he's talking about these social issues, he seems to harp on this idea that people are offended, emotional, and just kind of have this mob mentality and they're coming at him or whatever. I just want to address them in terms of argumentation. Right? I'm gonna just share my screen if I could. And I'll make this real quick. Just real quick, if I could. I want to help the audience out. Now, mind you, James White talked about as a sign of maturity to be able to properly categorize things. So real quick, there's different types of content that somebody can convey when they're speaking. You have emotional content, which may be offense, anger, sadness, bitterness, happiness, whatever, nostalgia, and fondness in his case, talking about Robert Lee and whatnot. So you got emotional content, you have moral content, where there's something, somebody speaking to something being good or bad, right or wrong. And you have propositional content, and I'm referring specifically to the truth value or falsity of a statement, right? So I'll give you an example at the bottom. It says, I am angered and saddened. I meant to put angered and saddened. Sorry about that. Okay. I am angered and saddened by the practice of elective abortions because it is murder and ought not to be legal in America, right? Now, I just want to make sure that we understand that you can't disregard the propositional content or the moral content of a statement just because you don't like the emotional content of the statement. I'm saying, so somebody who's pro-abortion may not feel me in terms of my anger and and feelings of sadness about abortion, right? They may not agree that I ought to be angered and saddened. They might think that my emotional content is distasteful. The fact that I'm angered and saddened by elective abortion, they might think that that's distasteful, right? But even if that's the case, they still got to do the hard work to show that I'm incorrect about abortions being murder and about it ought not to be legal in America, right? So you can't just camp out at expressing your distaste for somebody's emotional content where you just don't like the fact, or somebody's expressing some sort of emotion towards you. Okay, that's fine, but deal with the moral content and the propositional content that you're being presented with. So I think that it seems to me that James White tends to be dismissive when people are articulating their points with some emotional content involved. But what he needs to do is be mature, as he put it, and understand that if we're going to categorize appropriately, then he still needs to address the moral content and propositional content. So yeah, there was a lot of people coming at him on the thread who were very emotional, very upset that he's endorsing an individual who was such a heinous person, with respect to how he treated slaves and defended slavery and so forth. But just because they have some emotional content packaged with it, what they're saying, doesn't mean that we can disregard the moral and propositional content of what was said to him on that thread.
And real quick, can we do something, MJ? Can you pull up some more of Robert E. Lee, so we can get some more facts in here?
Well, I actually have a quote from a letter that he wrote to his wife about slavery. I can share that.
Okay, yeah, we could definitely do that, man. Yeah.
Adam, when you get ready, cue up slide 4 for me.
Okay, I got you.
Okay.
All right, here we go. All right, this is from a letter that he wrote to his wife. All right, so can you? All right, you see my? All right, great, great. All right, here we go. It says, wait, in this enlightened age, there are few, I believe, but what will acknowledge that slavery as an institution is a moral and political evil in any country. It is useless to expatiate on its disadvantage. I think it, however, a greater evil to the white man than to the black race. And while my feelings are strongly enlisted in behalf of the latter, my sympathies are more strong for the former. The blacks are immeasurably better off here than in Africa, morally, socially, and physically. The painful discipline they are undergoing is necessary for their instruction as a race. And I hope will prepare and lead them to better things. How long their subjugation may be necessary is known and ordered by a wise, merciful providence. Their emancipation will sooner result from their mild and melting influence of Christianity than the storms and the tempests of fiery controversy. This influence, though slow, is sure. The doctrines and miracles of our Savior have required nearly 2,000 years to convert but a small part of the human race, and even among Christian nations, what gross errors still exist. While we see the course of the final abolition of human slavery is onward, and we give it the aid of our prayers and all justifiable means in our power, we must leave the progress as well as the result in the hands who sees the end. Letter to his wife on slavery, selections December 27th, 1856, by Robert E. Lee.
Man, oh man.
Yet there were
No.
African Christians within the first 400 years of Christianity.
Mm.
Wow. Adam, go to slide 5, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
I want to get my sister Nefertiti's thoughts. What do you think about this, sis? Share your thoughts if you could for the audience. You can hear us.
I mean, it's it strikes a nerve because of the perpetuation of this myth that we, and by we I mean Afro descendants, were dependent on this, you know, as it has been termed, white savior complex. We needed them to save us from the dredges of savagery in Africa because we wouldn't have been civilized were it not for their intervention. This is an argument that they use, as we see, not only for the sustenance to sustain and maintain slavery, but also they were saying that we wouldn't be able to progress after slavery. So not only did we need to be saved from Africa, but even while in America, after having been exposed to these supposedly higher moral and civil standards, we would still need to be under the watch of the European American for our own good. But what we find is after emancipation, quite the opposite happened, and there is a boom of success such that it scares European Americans, and we start to see the rise of hate groups and hate activity directed at stalling that progression, directed at keeping at bay African Americans who are filling political offices, who are becoming professionals in their fields and booming in their own right. And so, you know, to somehow sweep that under the rug or dismiss that is disingenuous to the entire conversation. It is racist. I'm going to say that again. It is racist to teach that Black people are dependent or were dependent on any other society for our own progress. And it is also ignorant, as I'm sure I'm going to leave that part out because I'm sure Brother MJ is about to get into that. It's ignorant historically about the progression that we had already made prior to contact, or at least prior to enslavement by Europeans. And I just think it's perversion. It's a perversion of and you're making excuses for why you're engaging in this behavior, and not only are you dismissing the fact that you're the one who stands to benefit from it, but you're turning the tide to make it seem like we're benefiting. We benefit from being enslaved. It's gross, if you ask me.
Right. All right. So I know MJ, you got the slide up, man. So all right, man.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to address his behavior towards slaves after the war, but I think we need to talk about what happened with slaves during the war under Lee's watch. So I'm gonna read a little bit, and for any readers out there, I would just recommend that you get a couple of books. You can get Battle Cry of Freedom by James McPherson. You can get The Lost Indictment of Robert E. Lee by John Reeves. You can get No Quarter by Richard Slotuis, or something like that. Reading the Man by Elizabeth Brown Pryor, and The Recollections of Robert E. Lee, which are all his memoirs and recollections. But I'm gonna go ahead and read this, okay? So I want to talk about Lee's treatment of blacks during the war, okay? So what we see right off the back is free blacks were often kidnapped and enslaved. So during Lee's invasion of Pennsylvania, Lee's army of North Virginia enslaved black free Americans and brought them back to the South as property. Pryor writes that the evidence links virtually every infantry and cavalry unit in Lee's army to the abduction of free black Americans with activity under the supervision of sea officers. When Lee made his way to Pennsylvania during an invasion, Lee's Northern Army kidnapped free black Americans and brought them back to the South as property. On this, Pryor notes, worse was the sight of the Confederates kidnapping blacks who lived in the vicinity. It appears that several hundred African Americans were dragged from their homes and sold again into slavery. According to witnesses, small children were roped in front of the rebel wagons and driven just like we would drive cattle, sometimes guarded by the company chaplain. And this was not a set of random acts, but a willful policy of abduction. Okay. Now, when it came to his treatment of black soldiers, we see that Lee was intent on treating blacks as if they were property rather than respecting their uniforms. James McPherson comments that in October of 1864, General Lee proposed an informal exchange of prisoners captured in recent fighting on the Richmond-Petersburg front. General Grant agreed on the condition that blacks be exchanged the same as white soldiers. If this had been done, it might have provided a precedent to break the impasse that had been penned up for more than 100,000 men in POW camps. But Lee replied that Negroes belonging to our citizens are not considered subjects of exchange and were not included in my proposition. Okay, so there goes the myth that the war was not about slavery. Grant thereupon closed the correspondence with the words that because his government is bound to secure to all persons to receive into her armies their rights due to soldiers. Lee's refusal to grant such rights to former slave induces me to incline that making exchanges you ask. Okay, and that can be found in the Battle Cry of Freedom. Okay, but Lee's savagery does not stop there. Oh no, it becomes much worse for one simple reason. Okay, people should understand that the presence of black soldiers on the battlefield shattered the common ignorant myths in the South that their presence also served as a humbling experience that would serve to break the foundation of Southern arrogance. In other words, these black soldiers were anything but cowardly, docile, or stupid. As Pryor writes, fighting against the brave and competent African Americans challenged every underlying tenet of Southern society. The Confederate response to this challenge was to visit every possible atrocity and cruelty upon the black soldiers whenever possible. And this can be seen from enslavement to execution. One form of cruelty, James McPherson comments, citing an affidavit by a Union sergeant, described what happened after Confederates recaptured Plymouth on the North Carolina coast in 1864. All the Negroes found in blue uniforms or without any marks of a Union soldier upon him was killed. I saw some taken into the woods and hung. Others I saw stripped of all their clothing, and they stood on the banks of the rivers with their faces, and then they were shot. Still others were killed by having their brains beaten out by the butt of the end of the muskets in the hands of the rebels. All were not killed the day of the capture. Those that were not placed in a room with their officers, having previously been dragged through the town with ropes around their necks, where they were kept confined until the following morning when the remainder of black soldiers were killed. Okay, so let me summarize this up. In other words, when a soldier surrendered, they were supposed to be given certain rights, okay, maybe taken to an imprisonment camps. Not so for the black soldiers. These rebels, these traitors were so infuriated at the fact that they were being bested in combat and in warfare by these black soldiers that they took out their frustrations on them. They went the extra mile to brutalize them. And I could say more, but all this was done under Lee's watch. He knew what was going on. This was done under his watch. He was not only was he kidnapping free black citizens in the North and sending them back to the South as property, but he was mercilessly killing soldiers who had surrendered. He was mercilessly doing that to black soldiers who had surrendered. So this is the type of savagery that I'm talking about. And if that's respectable, I mean, these are just, Lee knew that it was a courtesy when a soldier would surrender, that you don't kill a surrendering soldier. Lee knew that. But once again, we could see his racism. We could see it. And like I said, black soldiers who had surrendered were murdered mercilessly. So, hey, if Dr. James White wants to give a full telling of history, or a robust view of history, this is not emotionalism. This man was an animal. And he professed to be a Christian. So come on, man. We have to be consistent. We have to be honest.
I just want to know. I really want, what is it so great, about him that we ought to idolize? He was a military strategist. I mean, for argument's sake, the enemy of souls is a military strategist. He, formulates all types of attacks upon the mind, body, and soul of human beings for the purpose of keeping us away from Christ. So should we glorify him for his brilliance? Because there are some traits that lead to, his ability to effect change or accomplish the goals that he's seeking. This is the enemy we're talking about. So I just find it very warped that someone engaging honestly in this conversation would see these things, would see these negative characteristics, would see what Brother MJ is showing here, and still say, well, but he was a great military leader. As if it goes back to the whole man of his time argument. We look at certain practices, for example, when they had prima nocta, where the royals would take brides on their first night and consummate the wedding instead of her actual husband, and how incensed the people were and how wrong that was. We can't just say, oh, that was the practice at the time, so let's not call it rape. That's what it was, bruh. So we're talking about slavery, and we're talking about, as Brother Adam pointed out earlier, all of the things attendant thereto, such as breeding human beings as cattle and then shipping their children away from their parents. Are we going to look at that and say that's okay? Are we going to say, oh, that's just a part of their time, their history, and overlook that and try to pull out what's good? I just find it disingenuous. The exact thing that we're being accused of is what is happening in this conversation. He's overlooking everything negative because he doesn't want to see that part and saying, let's still honor the man and his memory. But his memory includes all of these things.
And the reason for that is not only was there a censored of recorded history, there's also a spinning of recorded history as well, which I would like to get into if I can. Can I share my screen?
Say that.
So,
All right.
hold on. All right. You guys can see that? Yeah, great. All right. Blight, in his influential book, Race and Reunion, calls a reconciliation memory of the Civil War. The war came to be seen as a conflict in which both sides consisted of brave men fighting for noble principles. Union in the case of the North, self-determination on the part of the South. This vision was reinforced by the quote-unquote cult of Lincoln and Lee, each representing the noblest features of his society. Each a figure Americans of all regions could look back on with pride. The memory of Lee, this newspaper wrote in 1890, was, quote, the possession of the American people. Elsewhere, this is an article, The Making and Breaking of the Legend, Robert E. Lee by Eric Fun. This outlook was also taken up by the Southern agrarians, a group of writers who idolized the slave South as a bastion of manly virtue. In contrast to the commercialism and individualism of the industrial North, and at times when traditional values appeared to be in retreat, character trumped political outlook, and character Lee had in spades. Frank Osley, the most prominent historian among the agrarians, called Lee, quote, the soldier who walked with God. Many early biographies directly compared Lee and Christ. Moreover, with the influx of millions of Catholics and Jews from Southern and Eastern Europe alarming many Americans, Lee seemed to stand for a society where people of Anglo-Saxon stock controlled affairs. One more. Hold on. Is that it? Wait, hold on. Wait. Okay. Historians in the first decades of the 20th century offered scholarly legitimacy to this interpretation of the past. When justified the abrogation of the constitutional rights of Southern black citizens. At Columbia University, William A. Dunning and his students portrayed the granting of black suffrage during Reconstruction as a tragic mistake. The progressive historians, Charles Beard and his disciples, taught that politics reflected the clash of class interests, not ideological differences. The Civil War, Beard wrote, should be understood as a transfer of national power from the agricultural ruling class in the South to the industrial bourgeoisie of the North. He could tell the entire story without mentioning slavery except in a footnote. In the 1920s and 1930s, a group of mostly Southern historians, known as revisionists, went further, insisting that slavery was a benign institution that would have died out peacefully. Again, this is from The Making and the Breaking of the Legend of Robert E. Lee by Eric Fun. That's it.
Facts. Man.
Can I just
I tell you what.
Can I just do my thing right quick?
Yeah, go right ahead, man.
I just want to ask. I want to ask the audience a question. You know what I'm saying? Let me share my screen here, right?
All right.
How should we understand the Confederates? Okay. Let me share my screen here. Okay. Can everybody see that? Okay.
Yes.
So how should we understand the Confederates? Now, mind you, all of the Confederate states submitted what's called Articles of Secession, which means they officially withdrew, at least in their minds, they officially withdrew from the United States of America, and they went about trying to legitimize, whatever they refer to themselves, I guess the Confederate States of America, and they wanted to be recognized as their own nation. Now, we have to ask ourselves, okay, were the Confederates, A, part of our nation, or were they, B, not part of our nation, right? Now, they understood themselves to be their own nation. They believed that they had withdrawn and were no longer part of our nation, right? Now, here's the problem, right? The flip side is obviously Abraham Lincoln and the Union did not recognize that. They believed them to be still part of the nation, just kind of wayward, all right? Now, here's the issue. If, y'all see that? Let me make it a little bigger here. Here's the conundrum that we have, right? Oh, shoot. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm trying to make this bigger here. And it's not letting me. Can y'all see that, or do I still need to?
No, you good. Go ahead, man. Just read it, brother. Good.
All right, cool. I'm sorry. So if here's the thing, if the Confederates, if they were part of our nation, then they were traitors because they're fighting against the Union. They're members of the nation fighting against us, right? Or B, if they're not part of our nation, then they were enemies. Now, in either case, we have to then ask ourselves, in the case of Robert E. Lee, either he was a traitor or he was an enemy. Why should we memorialize enemies or traitors today in the United States of America, right? Can you point me to any other nation? Now, mind you, what your boy likes to do is to draw analogy, or excuse me, make associations to show how absurd something is. That's a common way to argue. So let's just try that. So if they were traitors, let's put Benedict Arnold up there then. Let's build a memorial to him. Or if they're enemies that we're going to respect based upon their, them being great generals, let's put Hitler out there. I mean, the Blitzkrieg, they did their thing. Make no mistake about it. They was balling out there in Europe. Hitler had a very effective military regime. So let's erect some monuments to Hitler or Rommel, guy who's a general, referred to as the Desert Fox. He was a beast, in World War II. So let's erect, something to him. Or anybody else you want to name. Or let's bring it home. He was talking about Planned Parenthood. Margaret Sanger was a very influential individual back in her day. She was very, savvy in terms of her dealing with folks. Let's erect a memorial to her. Right in front of.
But you know something?
Let's
real quick.
where we want to go.
Just to add on to that one point about Planned Parenthood thing. Ironically enough, because I know that James White is obviously affiliated with Jeff Durbin, and they are big against the whole abortion thing. They definitely hardcore protesting against abortion, which is something that we all agree with in here. We agree with their protests against abortion clinics. All right, just to be on record, because I don't want James White to think that we're Marxists, with Planned Parenthood, and what did he say about the
right, exactly.
Yeah. We don't rock with them.
No, we don't rock with them. Let me make it clear. I hate abortion. I hate elective abortions with the passion. I've done shows on it. If anybody questions me, I've got podcast episodes where I go in on that. I got Scott Klusendorf on there. So
watch this.
Let me just say
what you said. But what you said about the whole Planned Parenthood thing. Now, imagine erecting a statue of the founder. I guarantee you Jeff Durbin and these people would have an issue with that, would they not?
Exactly. That's my point. Exactly. And actually, let me just end up by saying this. I know I don't want to be too long-winded, but just to drive the point home, I find it very interesting that James White and many of his followers would take issue with Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, to protest, before our flag, right? But they don't have a problem memorializing enemies or traitors who shot bullets at individuals who represented the Union that flag represents today. So you have a problem. You have a problem with Colin Kaepernick taking the knee in front of the flag, but you're okay. I mean, just imagine. Back in the Civil War, imagine the guy marching with the Union flag, and your boy Robert E. Lee was taking shots at that guy. You're cool with him, but you have a problem with Colin Kaepernick. I'm gonna say you're being inconsistent. I'm refraining from saying being hypocritical. I'm trying to be nice because I'm on somebody else's channel. But at very least, as being inconsistent. I'll just leave it at that.
I co-sign those statements.
By the way, I want to be on record about something because I noticed that there's somebody in the live chat who's making mention of something to the effect of, you guys keep saying it's a hard issue. If it's a hard issue, he sins, so show it. Again, we have called what he did erroneous. We're not saying, for us, we believe that what he did was done out of ignorance. We don't believe that he's doing this because he's willfully trying. I personally don't believe he's willfully trying to be deceptive. I think what he's trying to do is, in his mind, conjure up an image about us without actually looking into what we actually hold to, or at least trying to be fair in properly representing our beliefs, because of the fact that and this is just my personal view of how I see the situation, he seems to be deriving his responses regarding what I had to say with his own emotions. So instead of it being a logical response, it's an emotion-based response. And when something is an emotion-based response, you kind of override logic and reasoning, and you begin to deal in a spectrum of just simply whatever you're conjuring up in your mind, that's what you believe about the other person, rather than letting the other person properly represent their beliefs, and then you draw your conclusions based off of what they've said, which is how one properly, engages an opposing viewpoint, right? We're not supposed to go into a conversation with presuppositions about the person. Rather, let the other person define their position and then deal with them accordingly. And I feel that what he did was he saw my post and he assumed that I was doing whatever it was that he imagined in his mind that the leftist, hyper liberal crowd does, and that somehow because they do that or have similar speech, even though I was very measured in how I approached him, very careful. I didn't use words like sin. I didn't use words like you're evil or you're this or you're that. I simply said, try to be more measured. This is a little careless, and it is careless. It was careless because the piece was made during a time, the timing was terrible on his end. Let's just call it how it is. Terrible timing. Regardless of what position he decided to take on Robert E. Lee, the timing is horrible. It was imprudent on his end. It shows a lack of consideration for what's going on. It seems, and not only that, but the smugness that I'm getting from his responses, almost as if to say, hey, I'm right, you're wrong, even though I don't really know what your position is. It just feels like some other thing that I may have heard. Therefore, it must be exactly like that. And it's unfortunate that he has to take that approach. Here's the thing. I've noticed how James White approaches people in debate. He is formidable as a debater. I will give him that all day, every day. He is very calculated in how he debates, and he is very careful in trying to properly represent the other side in debate. But for whatever reason, when it comes to other topics, let's be on record, when it comes to other topics, however, when it comes to this particular issue, he seems to drop the ball completely. And all that carefulness on his end goes out the window. I simply cannot understand how he can be that careless. Somebody as philosophically inclined, as intelligent as he is, should not be dropping the ball in the manner that he is. There should be more
but again,
understanding and nuance on his end.
It's the understanding of we all can't be good at everything. We all lack in different areas in our life. Some of us are better orators than we are, one-on-one speakers. It's like we all have blind spots. This is his. And the issue is the wantingness of having him acknowledge the fact that, hey, maybe I need to consider what's being told to me. Right? That's the issue here. It doesn't seem like he took the time to allow it to gestate in him. Be like, you know what? Does this individual have a point? Let me ponder that for a minute before I make my response. And it doesn't seem like that was the case.
And James White is a Calvinist, and he should know that there are no etic effects of sin. There are no etic effects of sin on the human mind, and you don't have to actually be a homosexual, or you don't have to actually be out having adultery or doing things for the noetic effects of sin. You don't have to say the N word or anything like that. The sin has noetic effects, and what we're saying is this big old blind spot that you refuse to acknowledge. I mean, I had Dr. White in a conversation on Twitter with Dr. Michael Brown, and Dr. Michael Brown at least acknowledged that he had blind spots. Dr. White said, well, I gotta save babies from being murdered. I don't have time. We all have blind spots, brothers, but I don't have time. I gotta save these babies from getting murdered. And immediately he went into identity politics on me. So look, I think that it's an emotional issue and it's a noetic issue.
Robert E. Lee wasn't no babies, except the ones he sold down the river. That's right?
Yeah, he split up more families than welfare.
Right. Exactly.
I'm going to say this, right? I think that James White needs to be as charitable as he is with Muslims, with his fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. We are brothers and sisters in the faith. Everybody in here affirms the Trinity. We affirm grace alone, faith alone, Christ alone. We are all adamant about defending the faith. We believe in the foundation of the scriptures, right, as our ultimate authority. Everybody in here subscribes to orthodoxy, but for whatever reason, when it comes to this kind of topic, these particular topics, and the particular people that he's interacting with, urban apologists, he doesn't have the same level of charitability with us. We're immediately lumped in with Marxists and all kinds of different groups, none of which we have any affiliation with, nor do we agree with, right? We're lumped in with the Planned Parenthood crowd, Marxism, totalitarians, all, you name it. And I wish he would have a more nuanced approach with us as he does with Yasser Qadi. And I got to keep saying that again.
And the good news, right, in this is that we know that he has the ability to do that. We've seen him be compassionate and charitable, right? So that's good. So it's not like this James White is a lost cause, right? We know he can do this. What we would like is to see him do that with us, right?
No,
you could do it with the unbeliever, do it with the believer too.
Well, yeah, I agree, and I could be, again, feel free to boot me off, Mike, if you want to, but I'm going to say real quick that I think that I characterize it as emotional and moral laziness. You know what I'm saying? I think that he doesn't want to do the hard work of extending the principle of charity to individuals within the body of Christ who disagree with him with respect to social issues, racial issues, so on and so forth. You know what I'm saying? Maybe he devotes a lot of his time and energy to textual criticism and those kind of things, and maybe he doesn't have enough brain cells left over to maintain it when it comes to these issues. Like maybe this is just kind of like I don't know, maybe this is recreation for him. It's not recreation for me. Like these things are serious, and I think that from a moral standpoint, I think it's lazy on his part to just categorize everything as being emotions without recognizing that you do have the obligation of love to your brothers and sisters.
Laziness is a sin, by the way.
Yeah, I think it's morally lazy.
But hold on a second. Let's do something real quick though. All right. Let's not accuse him of sin. What we are going to say is erroneous on his end because it's short-sighted. And what he needs to do is take a more nuanced approach with us, the same nuanced approach that he's taking with people. And think about it. You're taking a nuanced approach with Muslims, with disbelievers. Do the same with your brothers and sisters in the faith, people that you're going to spend eternity with. Take the same approach that you do with us, with them, as you do with us. That's what you need to do.
Don't use unequal scales.
Right.
I think
I want to be on record though, Matt, because I don't want him because I want us to be consistent here. We're not accusing him of sin. We're accusing him of being completely short-sighted and erroneous. And I feel that it's being done because he needs to have a better balance in how he interacts with opposing viewpoints from the Christian spectrum, from the Orthodox Christian spectrum of the body of Christ, because everybody in here subscribes to the same orthodoxy that he does. So therefore, we should be charitable. And we're trying, even now, just so Mr. White can see this, I was being charitable in correcting my brother right here, just so conversation can flow and we can have a meaningful dialogue. As Dr. White always says, we need to have meaningful dialogue and we need to be careful in how we approach the opposing side. Well, this is the perfect opportunity for him to put those words into practice, because we've put those words into practice. We've tried to be as balanced as we possibly can with this topic, which is sensitive for many of us. Now he needs to do the same thing and perhaps be more understanding of the objections.
And I think that our side is very much capable of it. Adam just had a conversation with Tim Stratton and another brother on their channel. It was very it was productive, and I think a lot of people learned from it, and both sides were practicing charity. And hopefully that'll be something that one day we can do with Dr. White.
Oh, yeah, and just to be clear, I mean, with James White himself, I mean, I haven't really said it publicly before, but I spoke to James White face to face directly. You know what I'm saying? It was very cordial conversation. You know what I'm saying? I think he would be hard pressed to construe that conversation as being as having been, malicious or contentious rather. So I mean, I've spoken with him directly. You know what I'm saying? And I think that I was about as cordial as it could be. And to be fair, I think that it's just like with murder. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you got like first degree, second degree, third degree. You got manslaughter where maybe somebody didn't intentionally do it, but they're still culpable. For charity's sake, maybe that's what it is. Maybe he's not intentional with what he's doing, but I do think that we ought to be held accountable for being reckless. Particularly if we have a public platform.
Indeed. The rest of the video is him just, in all fairness, it was him strawmanning us as he did in the beginning. If anyone wants to watch it, I'm going to leave the video in the description. You can check it out for yourself. You can watch from about 34 seconds in all the way to about, I want to say roughly 39 minutes. And so, our video speaks for itself. I'm going to tag James White into this particular video once it's done. And I would hope that he would respond, that he would at least take the time to consider the talking points, and that he would at least address what we've said. And if he disagrees, that he would again practice the same cordiality that he extended to Yasser Qadi and to the Muslim community, that he would extend that same cordiality to us, being that we're believers. But with that being said, I'm gonna let you guys shout out your social media, where people can find you. I'll let MJ start first. Hey, let me tell you something. This brother right here, man. Yo, I'm telling you, man, low key, this brother right here. I mean, man, you don't get as much credit as you deserve, brother. I feel like I'm gonna sing my brother's praises right now. This brother right here, y'all need to subscribe to his. You got a YouTube channel, right, MJ?
Oh yeah,
I'm making sure because people. Yeah. Shout out your YouTube channel, man. Let people know where they can find you. This brother is thorough.
Yeah, y'all can find my channel at the Urban Christian Institute. That's the easiest way to pull it up. I also have a Facebook page, the Urban Christian Institute. I'm gonna try to be a little bit more active. I got a couple of interviews coming up here soon. I think sometime next week I'm gonna be talking apologetic methodology with Dr. Jonathan Pritchett on my channel. I got another interview in the works with Dr. John Oswald discussing his book, The Bible Amongst the Myths. I think that discussion is going to be really helpful when you're dealing with comedics and how they like to say that the Bible is a myth and that it's copied from myth. But we're going to, probably talk about how myth is a worldview in and of itself, and we'll be discussing some of the details of that. So y'all just be on the watch out, and might do a couple of other episodes here and there, but I got some stuff coming in the works before the 4th of July.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for that, brother. And real quick, since my sister's not here, y'all check out Nefertiti. I don't know if y'all seen that work that she gave Dante Fortson. All right, and she gets it in. My sister gets it in. Listen, she a lot sharper than a lot of these Hebrew Israelite dudes out here, man. I tell you that. Pretty much all of them. My sister Nefertiti can be found just by typing her name into YouTube. That's Nefernitty. Definitely subscribe to her channel. Subscribe to my brother MJ. As a matter of fact, subscribe to everybody on here. But I'm gonna let them shout themselves out though. So because Adam Coleman, man, he's big time now. He rolling with David Wood. This brother over here, man, he done went Hollywood on us, man. He about to pass me in subs, So hey, man.
Not at all, man.
He's gonna cut his dreads.
Yeah, man.
Right. I went vegetarian, man, and it changed everything, man. I'm telling you what it was, But no, man, it's True ID Apologetics, TRUID Apologetics on YouTube. Also, True ID Apologetics, got the .com there as well. Check out the website. I'm just trying to do my part, man. I'm really passionate about the gospel. I'm passionate about people having a right understanding of the gospel and the biblical worldview. So I'm just trying to get it out there. And I think that this is a great time, particularly for Christian apologists, to exemplify what the biblical worldview looks like in terms of the moral framework and standing against injustice, standing up for the right thing, so that we can take leverage away from the Hebrew Israelites, Comedics, and whoever else would, attempt to, claim that Christians ain't about that life. You know what I'm saying? I think we're showing that that's obviously false. And so I think that's important. So that's where I'm at, man. I got actually Dr. Vince Bantu's coming up on the channel this Thursday, talking about his new book. So you definitely want to tune in for that, man. And got some new stuff. Actually, I'm going to be at doing a video joint for Epiphany Fellowship this Saturday as well, dealing with the problem of evil. So y'all definitely want to tune in on that in the series they're doing as well, man. So love y'all, man. Appreciate you having me, Mike. And definitely subscribe to my man MJ, Faithful, and BK Apologists as well, man. I mean, it's well worth the subscription. So no doubt, man.
Absolutely. And of course, my brother BK Apologist, y'all need to support this man. Matter of fact, this brother, like we were talking about it, this brother hit 1,000 subs. Now he might lose about 500 after this one. Now I'm just playing. I'm
messing with you, yeah. You know what I mean?
All right, go ahead and shout out your social media.
So you can catch me. I put my link a couple of times already in the chat. Tomorrow I will be doing a show talking about the Christian contribution to science. So that will be at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And of course, every Friday we have the Bodega Bible Talk, where I have gentlemen such as MJ and Adam Coleman in the Bodega. And it's basically the urban apologetics answer to The View, right? We talk about all these different hot topics, and we give our perspective as Christian people. Later in a few weeks, I'm going to have the Bodega Bible Talk Bodega Ladies Edition, where we're going to have some of the sisters take over the bodega, and they're going to talk about various subjects as well. And then in July, I'm going to have Inspiring Philosophy come, and we're going to talk about ancient African monotheism. So that's coming down the pipe.
That's what's up. A lot of big names, y'all. See, they getting too Hollywood on me, man. See, you know what I mean? But yeah, I absolutely positively hope that when James White watches this, if he does watch it, that again, he would afford us the same charitability. We can have these discussions, and hopefully, this would help him improve on how he approaches this topic, at the very least with us, and hopefully with everyone else in the body who shares the same views as us in terms of social issues. Right. Because these are, I'm going to say this right now for everyone out there, these are very important topics. This is something that is, for everyone in the room, an issue of concern. It's not something that we take lightly, and we would hope that people would at least consider what is being said, because we certainly, as fellow image bearers and more importantly, members of the body of Christ, we are actively seeking to proclaim the gospel, the death, burial, and resurrection. But we also believe in the two great commandments: love your God above all things, love your neighbor as yourself. And if you truly love your neighbor as yourself, when your neighbor is being oppressed, when your neighbor is going through injustice, you should be concerned about your neighbor's plight. And in this case, we know that these issues are afflicting African Americans, and people need to be concerned with these issues if they are Christians, more so than anyone else. But I definitely thank you, brothers, for coming through. And we'll definitely do more shows like this, and you can definitely expect a lot more content. Just wanted to let everybody out there know who showed support that I appreciate you, everyone who watched. Even if you don't agree with us, I still appreciate the fact that you took the time to view this, and maybe this will change your mind, Lord willing. But with that being said, God bless you all. I hope this has edified someone out there. And until next time, God bless.